right, so today we're diving headfirst into the life of, well, I guess you could say, one of the most talked about figures in recent history, Donald Trump.
Yeah, no shortage of opinions there.
Not at all.
Yeah.
And you sent me a whole bunch of Wikipedia articles. It covers everything, doesn't it? His
Yeah.
childhood in Queens, his business empire, that wild presidency, all the legal stuff, and of course how people see him. It's a lot to cover.
It really is. And, he's been in the public eye for so long, decades, really.
Yeah,
But there's still so much to uncover.
it's true. There's some real surprises in these sources, actually.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
For instance, did you know Trump apparently thinks exercise is bad for you?
Really?
Says the human body is like a battery, limited energy.
I've never heard that one before.
Oh, and he owned a USFL team at one point.
Wow. See? Always something new.
We'll get to all that, of course. But before we even start, got to be clear,
All right.
right?
Okay.
Our goal here is to present what these sources say, not pick sides, no agendas, especially with all the political stuff.
Yeah, keeping it objective, just the facts, and different points of view.
Exactly. Okay, so beginnings. Trump's early life, how he got into business. Seems his father, Fred Trump, was a huge influence.
Ugh.
And there's this lawyer, Roy Cohn, like a mentor.
Right, Roy Cohn. Now, there was a character. Aggressive, tons of connections. Sounds like he really shaped Trump's whole approach to problems. No prisoners, And from the start, there was controversy. Back in the 70s, Trump's company got hit with a racial discrimination lawsuit from the government.
Really?
They were accused of refusing to rent to black tenants.
Wow.
Early example of that combativeness, even when facing serious accusations. And that pattern, it just keeps going through his business career. There were the big wins, obviously, Grand Hyatt Hotel, that put him on the map in New York.
You've got articles on everything, casinos, sports teams, even, get this, a cycling race.
He went for it all, didn't he?
High-profile, risky ventures, all the way.
Some paid off, others not so much. Like Trump Air, his airline. That one crashed and burned, literally ended in bankruptcy.
So, spectacle over substance.
Maybe. And speaking of spectacle, we can't forget about that time he supposedly dictated a glowing medical report about himself to his doctor.
Wait, what?
Claimed he'd be the healthiest president ever. Turns out the doctor later said he felt pressured into writing it.
Hold on. I need to process this.
Yeah.
He dictated his own medical report. That seems unusual, to say the least. Was that a common practice?
Not at all. And it really shows that desire right through his life to control his image, always present himself in the best possible light, truth be damned.
Okay, so these issues, they go way back then. You said he actually countersued the government for $100 million.
He did.
With Coon's help, I'm guessing.
Naturally.
Yeah.
But eventually they settled, agreed to desegregate their properties.
So now let's jump into the presidency. That's a big chunk of your research here. Where do we even start?
Well, how about domestic policy? Some notable wins, legislatively speaking, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, for instance. Big tax cuts for corporations and individuals, though the long-term effects are still debated by economists.
Right. And they tackled things like the opioid crisis, school safety, human trafficking, even criminal justice reform. Seems like those got overshadowed, though.
Yeah, by some of the, shall we say, more controversial moves, like trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act. That was already providing health insurance to millions.
Right. Huge backlash there.
And then there's that Muslim ban, restricting travel from those Muslim-majority countries. And of course the wall, the border wall, always divisive.
Yeah, constant source of arguments. And then we have to talk about the family separations at the border.
Thousands of kids separated from their parents. Those images really sparked outrage, protests, showed just how divided things were.
Okay, so now foreign policy.
Right.
Russia, first off. That ties into one of the biggest controversies of Trump's presidency, right? Russian interference in the 2016 election.
Huge issue. And Trump kept praising Putin even with the intelligence community confirming the interference. Fueled suspicion, obviously, became central to the Mueller investigation.
Didn't find enough for criminal conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia, right?
That's right. But they did outline possible obstruction of justice.
Lots of legal complexities there. Okay, so broader foreign policy. I mean, you've got the trade war with China, sanctions on Huawei, that whole up and down relationship with Kim Jong-un and North Korea. What's the overall theme, would you say?
Well, it seems like Trump was going for that America First approach, more isolationist, even if it strained ties with traditional allies. He pulled the U.S. out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Paris Climate Agreement, even the Iran nuclear deal. Worried a lot of U.S. allies, seemed to prefer those personal relationships, one-on-one deals, over the long-standing alliances, often with authoritarian leaders, too.
Interesting. Okay, we can't avoid it, COVID-19. From what I see here, Trump's response was a lot of downplaying the virus, pushing unproven treatments, clashing with the health officials.
Yeah,
Right.
it was a lot of back and forth contradiction. He was frequently going against experts from the CDC, other agencies, pushing hydroxychloroquine, even without solid evidence, resisting masks. It really undermined those public health efforts, probably added to the confusion and division, too.
You also mentioned his administration pressuring the CDC on testing guidelines, downplaying the economic impacts. It's crazy to think back to that time, all the uncertainty, the fear.
It really was. And in the end, how he handled the pandemic, it became a defining part of his presidency, hurt his approval, and probably played a part in him losing to Biden in 2020.
Right. All right, well, time to tackle the legal battles, all the controversies that seem to follow Trump around. Lots to unpack here.
There is. I mean, the number of investigations, lawsuits, it's mind-boggling. Through his career, before and during the presidency. To make sense of it, maybe we focus on the big ones, the most significant, according to what you've got here.
Sounds good. Let's start with those hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. That happened during the 2016 campaign, trying to silence those affair allegations. Seems like those came back to bite him.
Oh, they did. They became the focus of the Manhattan District Attorney's investigation. And Michael Cohen, Trump's former lawyer, he pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations for those payments. Said he'd acted on Trump's orders.
And those were part of the first impeachment, weren't they?
They were. The House impeached Trump in 2019. Abuse of power, obstruction of Congress, trying to pressure Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his son. The hush money, that was part of the abuse of power charge. Argument was he used his office for personal gain. But the Senate, they acquitted him.
Then impeachment number 2, all about the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
Yeah, that was unprecedented, to say the least. Trump loses the 2020 election, refuses to concede, keeps claiming voter fraud, urges his supporters to fight like hell. Then, January 6th, the mob storms the Capitol, interrupts the electoral vote count, forces Congress to evacuate.
The sources really paint a picture of the chaos, the violence, how Trump's words played into it.
Absolutely. House impeached him again, but Senate acquitted him once more.
So on top of all that, you've got investigations into his business practices, potential fraud, that sexual abuse and defamation case from E. Jean Carroll.
Which he was found liable for, by the way. It all points to a pattern, doesn't it? This disregard for rules, norms, runs through his whole career. And these legal fights, they didn't stop after he left office.
Okay, so that brings us to 2024. Despite everything, he runs for president again.
And incredibly, he wins. Beats Kamala Harris, becomes the second president in U.S. history to serve 2 non-consecutive terms.
Quite a comeback. Shows how much appeal he still had for a big portion of voters. But it also worried his critics, didn't it? Given his past rhetoric, what they saw as potential authoritarian tendencies.
Yeah, there were those concerns about his age, too. Oldest person to be elected president ever. And his win just showed how divided things were politically. Seems like no matter the controversy, he stayed incredibly popular with Republicans, while his approval among Democrats remained consistently low.
Okay, so we've gone through business, politics. Now what about his public image overall? How have historians, scholars assessed him?
Well, that's where it gets really interesting. Because for all the scrutiny, for everything that's been written about him, Trump is still this polarizing figure.
Love him or hate him, right? No middle ground.
Pretty much. And get this, his approval ratings never even hit 50%, ever. Which for a modern president is unheard of. You see those record highs among Republicans, but record lows with Democrats. Consistent pattern there.
And that partisan split, it went beyond just the voters, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. The media coverage was a perfect example. Conservative outlets, they often painted Trump favorably, focused on what they considered accomplishments, downplayed the controversies. Then you've got liberal media, far more critical. Scandals, the divisive rhetoric, what they saw as incompetence.
So depending on your news source, you got 2 completely different Trumps.
Exactly. Underscores how important it is to look at multiple sources, right? Different viewpoints, really think critically about the information, especially with someone like Trump, where emotions run high.
It's true. Now, stepping back a bit, Trump's impact, it wasn't just American politics. This guy's a global figure, praised and criticized all over the world.
Yeah, no doubt about that. And your research shows his policies, especially on trade and immigration, they had ripple effects internationally.
Like pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Paris Climate Agreement. That upset a lot of U.S. allies, seen as backing away from global leadership.
Right, and his style, the way he handled diplomacy, all about personal connections, those bilateral deals, that rubbed some countries the wrong way, too.
And then there's the rhetoric, that tendency to use inflammatory language, attack those democratic norms. A lot of people saw that as destabilizing, harmful to the whole global order.
Safe to say, Trump's presidency had a huge impact globally, both the policies themselves and how America was perceived.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit, let's look at Trump's business career. You sent me all these articles, and it's kind of a mixed bag, successes and failures both.
Trump's business dealings, they're almost as complex, as controversial as his politics. Built this huge real estate empire, presents himself as a billionaire, but then you see the bankruptcies multiple times. And the lawsuits, accusations of fraud.
It's hard to reconcile those two things, isn't it? The successful businessman image, but then all these issues that make you wonder about his actual skills, his ethics.
That's the Trump paradox. And it's worth noting, a lot of these issues, they predate his political life. Meaning, this approach to business, it was already there, deeply ingrained.
So maybe we shouldn't be surprised by how he acted as president, given that background.
It's a valid point. How did that business world shape his governing? Interesting question.
Right. The deal-making focus, that disregard for conventions, even long-standing ones.
Exactly. And that tendency to view everything transactionally.
Like the presidency itself was just another deal to negotiate, another way to benefit personally.
That's a sharp observation, and one that's been explored a lot, trying to understand Trump's presidency.
So we've talked about those concerns about his second term, that potential for authoritarianism. But policy-wise, any specific proposals or actions that stand out from this period?
Well, gotta remember, his second term got cut short.
Right, the assassination attempt. That rallying in Pennsylvania. Easy to forget that happened.
It was a shock, for sure. Shook the nation, the whole world. A reminder of how volatile things had become, the danger from extremism.
The details are still kind of unclear, right?
They are. From what we know, gunman opens fire at the rally, July 2024. Witnesses say they heard the shots, saw people panicking. Trump was hit, rushed to the hospital, but didn't make it.
And then J.D. Vance, his running mate, he took over.
He did. Became the 48th president. A tragic, unexpected turn. Makes you wonder what might have been if Trump had finished that second term.
It's a crazy story when you think about it. The legal battles, the return to the White House, then this sudden end.
Captivated the nation, divided it too. Even in death, Trump's legacy, it's still debated, controversial.
Speaking of legacies, let's dig into that. What do these sources say about his overall impact? How historians view him?
It's fascinating, isn't it? One of the most scrutinized people ever, and yet Trump remains this enigma.
I know you mean. Even after all this information, there's still that sense of mystery.
Exactly. That's part of what makes him so compelling, so endlessly discussed. But let's start with what we do know. Public opinion, it stayed deeply divided throughout his entire life. High approval among Republicans, often over 80%, but with Democrats, it rarely even broke 10%.
And that split, like we said, mirrored in the media coverage too.
Absolutely. Conservative outlets, they often highlighted the positives, what they saw as achievements, downplayed any problems. Liberal media, on the other hand, they were much more critical, focusing on the scandals, that divisive way he talked, what they perceived as incompetence.
So depending on what you read, what you watched, you got two very different versions of Donald Trump.
Precisely, which is why it's crucial to look at a range of sources, right? Consider different viewpoints, be critical of what you're taking in. That's especially true with someone as polarizing as Trump.
It's a good reminder that we all have biases, filters when we look at information.
Yeah.
And thinking critically, that's essential, especially these days with the constant flood of news and opinions.
Couldn't agree more. Now, back to the global stage for a second. Trump's impact, it went way beyond just American politics. He's a global figure, praised and criticized all over the world.
Right, and the research shows how his policies, especially on trade and immigration, had those international ripple effects.
Big time. Like him pulling out of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Paris Climate Agreement. A lot of U.S. allies were unhappy about that, saw it as America stepping back from leading globally.
And the way he approached diplomacy, very personal, focused on those bilateral deals,
Yeah.
that caused friction with some countries too.
It did. And his rhetoric, using inflammatory language, attacking those democratic norms, a lot of people internationally saw that as destabilizing, harmful to the whole established world order.
So yeah, it's safe to say his presidency had a major impact globally, both
Yeah.
the actual policy changes and how America itself was seen by other
For
countries.
sure. And that's a legacy that'll probably be debated for a long time to come.
Okay, let's shift gears again. Now we're on to Trump's business career. The sources you sent, they paint a pretty mixed picture, successes and failures side by side.
Trump's business dealings almost as complex and controversial as his time in politics. He builds this massive real estate empire, claims to be a billionaire, but then you see he's declared bankruptcy multiple times. And there's lawsuits, accusations of fraud.
Hard to square those two things. That image of the successful businessman, but then all these issues that raise questions about his actual skills, his ethics.
Right, the Trump paradox. And to be clear, a lot of these issues, they predate his political career. Suggests that his approach to business, it was already there, deeply set.
So maybe we shouldn't be so surprised by how he acted as president, considering that background.
It's a valid point. How did that business world shape his governing style? Fascinating to think about.
The focus on making deals, that willingness to break norms, even ones that have been around forever.
Absolutely. And that tendency to view everything as a transaction.
Like he saw the presidency itself as just another deal to make, another chance to benefit himself personally.
A thought-provoking idea, for sure. One that analysts have spent a lot of time considering, trying to understand the Trump presidency.
So speaking of understanding his presidency, where do historians and scholars stand on him so far?
Well, it's still early days, you know.
Yeah.
Might take decades before historians can really grapple with the complexity of his presidency, the lasting effects.
But surely there were some initial thoughts, right? What are historians saying about him right now?
There are. And like we've said, the assessments vary a lot. Some focus on what they consider his accomplishments, things like passing tax cuts, appointing conservative judges. Others highlight the failures, the pandemic response, actions that weakened democratic institutions.
And then there's his personal character, right? How that might have impacted American culture.
Right. Some argue that his presidency normalized bigotry, intolerance. Others say he was just reflecting existing divisions in society, things that were already there.
It's a complex debate, and I'm guessing it'll go on long after we're gone.
Probably will. The most intriguing thing about Trump's legacy might be all the questions he raises about American identity, about truth itself, about the future of democracy.
That's a lot to ponder. But I feel like this deep dive has given us a solid foundation. Understanding the different sides of Trump, his impact on the world.
I think so too. And hopefully it'll inspire our listener to keep digging.
Me too. There's always more to learn, especially with someone like Trump.
You know, one thing that keeps coming up, it's his need to push boundaries, challenge the status quo, consequences be damned.
That's a good point. It's there in everything. His over-the-top business stuff, his unconventional campaigns.
Exactly. And it's in his personal style, too.
Yeah.
Larger than life, that tendency towards hyperbole, self-promotion.
Like he's always putting on a show, playing a role, even in his personal life.
Maybe he is. And that performance, that was part of his draw for some people, but it alienated others, too.
Right. Some liked his charisma, how he said what he thought, even if it was offensive or politically incorrect.
Yeah.
Others were turned off by what they saw as narcissism, a lack of empathy, disregard for the truth.
A fascinating divide. Really speaks to how split American society is. And those splits, Trump both exploited them and made them worse.
And those divisions, they're likely to last beyond his death.
Most likely. Trump's legacy, it's complex, lots of layers. He'll be debated, analyzed for generations.
And this deep dive, it's given us a glimpse into that complexity, the things that shaped him, the choices he made, the impact he had.
Definitely. Hopefully it's inspired our listener to keep exploring this guy. Fascinating, controversial figure.
Absolutely, because understanding Trump, it's key to understand the challenges and opportunities facing America and the world today.
Well said. And on that note, I think we've reached the end of this deep dive.
It's true, he really did shake things up.
Yeah.
And yeah, whether you agreed with him or not, he got people talking about some big issues, stuff the country needed to deal with.
No doubt about that. And his presidency, I think people will be studying it, debating it for years to come. Historians, political scientists, trying to figure out his rise, his policies, what it all means for America, for society as a whole.
We've covered so much today, haven't we? Business, the White House, the legal stuff, his legacy. Quite a journey.
It has been. And the sources you sent, they really give you a lot to think about.
They do. And for you listening, I'd encourage you to keep digging into this guy. He's fascinating, complex. Maybe dive deeper into something specific that grabs your interest, something we didn't have time for today.
Yeah, there's always more to find out, more angles to look at, more questions to ask. When it comes to Trump, that's for sure.
Couldn't agree more. It's been great unpacking all this with you. What a deep dive.
It has. Thanks for having me.
And thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into a whole new topic. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going.